Government decisions shape our lives, from education and healthcare to economic opportunities and the environment. But these policies, to be fair and effective, citizens need to have a voice in their creation. By voting, attending forums, participating in public discussions, and engaging with advocacy efforts, we ensure that policies reflect diverse needs and perspectives. Civil society organizations, that's the CSOs, play a powerful role in this process. As advocates for good governance, human rights, and social justice, they work tirelessly to hold governments accountable, inform communities of their rights, and give voice to underrepresented groups through research, outreach, and policy recommendations. These organizations drive meaningful dialogue between the citizens and the policymakers, pushing for transparency, equity, and inclusiveness. But does that really work? Our guest believes that active citizens' participation and the advocacy of CSOs can make governments more responsive, just, and connected to the people they serve. This partnership is not only strengthening democracy, but builds a society where policies protect the right, empower communities, and promote shaped progress or shared progress. Newsnight sat down for a conversation with Mr. Clement Nwankwo, the Executive Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC, and we discuss government policies and citizens' participation. Mr. Clement Nwankwo, thank you for speaking with us on Newsnight.
Thank you. No.
You know, from the 80s and till date, you have been relentless. Some will say you have evolved, but we do know that you started out as a human rights watcher, if there's anything like that, and you've been pursuing that so much so that you've evolved down towards policy and advocacy. But tell us what it's been like. Human Rights Watch from the early 80s, 1987, if I remember correctly, and from then till now, what's it been like?
It's been some journey. In 1987, when I came up with the idea of Nigeria's first human rights organization, the Civil Liberties Organization, and founded it together with my friend and colleague Olisa Agbakoba. It's been a mixed bag, so to say. When we started out, it came from our experience seeing victims of human rights abuse approach us as lawyers, and us trying to find out how best we can respond to the multiple instances of human rights abuse under a brutal military dictatorship. In 1983, the civilian government of Alhaji Shehu Shagari was overthrown and replaced by a very brutal military dictator who, of course, later became
President,
a civilian president.
Yeah.
It was General Muhammadu Buhari. And the levels of abuse of human rights in that period was incredible. It was never something that we had seen in this country. So that led us to start out the Civil Liberties Organization, myself and Olisa. And we have seen the evolution of the human rights movement since then. Starting from one lone organization in 1987, the Civil Liberties Organization, we have seen a multiplicity of organizations. And I myself have moved on from, on to several other organizations after that. And that's what you might call a policy evolution that we're talking about. We started as human rights defenders, and we're still human rights defenders, but it was a situation where we were not engaged with policymakers, because the policymakers were military dictators who were not prepared to engage. They were prepared to enforce themselves on citizens. So we came out in 1987, and through the work of the Civil Liberties Organization, and I was its founding director. It was called National Secretary then. I then also set up a Constitutional Rights Project. And in all of that period, it was confronting the military. We wanted the military out of power, wanted them out of government, wanted to replace the military system of government with a civilian democracy. And we succeeded in doing that in 1999,
yeah.
after another brutal military dictator, General Abacha, died.
Yeah. So, but would you say that that movement, now that the civilian administration has been instituted since 1999, now we've had about 20 years plus of uninterrupted civilian government. Would you say that in terms of human rights, citizens' participation, and policy, there's a nexus?
We've had 25 years of uninterrupted civilian rule in this country. And what we have seen is the evolution of civil society. First of all, we called ourselves human rights organizations. We called ourselves non-governmental organizations. The term civil society is part of that evolution that we have now become what is called in general terms civil society organizations. But for a lot of us who started out in that era, we still see ourselves as NGOs, we still see ourselves as human rights defenders, human rights activists, not because civil society is not civil or wasn't civil then, it was because there was confrontation. So now what we see is that we believe that all of your advocacy really is advocacy, and advocacy includes that you could educate people by your advocacy, by the things you say. You could create awareness by the things that you say. But sometimes advocacy doesn't necessarily result in policy formation or reformation. And that's the skills that have now emerged, that do your advocacy, identify your message, identify the reform you want to carry it out, and take it to the next level, which is to make it policy or to make it law. And that's what we have seen in that evolution. And that's why in the work that we do at Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, advocacy is key. But what is uppermost is our ability to reform, our ability to influence policy, our ability to change the policy direction of Nigeria to improve conditions of living, improve human rights, improve our democracy.
Okay, so there's something you said that, and I thought we should just go back a bit here. You've been doing advocacy, if I can use that phrase. You've been doing advocacy since the 80s. But now you said something. Advocacy doesn't necessarily lead to policy change.
Yeah.
So what's the point in advocating for anything?
Like I said, advocacy could create awareness. And, if an organization decides that what it wants to do is advocacy to create awareness, that is welcome. That's very important. You won't tell me that the quality of Nigerian citizens is the same today as it was 25 years ago. You have a more enlightened population. You have a more educated population. You have more ambitious people who want to see development in this country. You have young people who have wider access to all of the means of communication, all of the means of education. They see TV, they see the internet, they see videos, they see YouTube, they see all sorts of things. They see TikTok, they see Twitter. All of that means that you have a population that's far more educated than we were 25 years ago. We have a population of young people who are far more ambitious than we were 25 years ago. And they want to see, they are also more impatient about the situation of the country. And a lot of us who are also seeing what is going on today around the world are very impatient about Nigeria's present situation. So advocacy is important. A lot of people are creating accounts that give them influence, and so you have influencers. Those influence may be really a battle for the mind of the people, a battle for the hearts of the people, but it may not necessarily translate into actual immediate change in policy or in laws. So you have different levels. The advocacy, that means you engage those who are involved directly in lawmaking, in formulating policy, and then the advocacy that is targeting the population and trying to get the population to think in a particular way.
So it's that nexus, that meeting point that begins to draw the attention of many people, because we have the government here being the three tiers: legislative, executive, and judiciary, and then we have the people. The government comes up with the different policies, whether it's legislative policies or executive policies or judicial policies. All of them affect the citizenry. But the citizens seem to be, in all of their education, appears to be aloof or not in there, not wanting to be there. Why do you think that is so?
I think in some ways you could have citizens who feel powerless. It's not because they approve. They certainly object, but they feel powerless. That powerlessness comes from whether they are able to mobilize a direct challenge to a government policy or practice. And that's why you have seen some of the protests happening, whether it's NSAS or End Bad Governance or whatever protests that you have seen in recent years. It's of citizens who are showing their discontent. And when you look around the policy environment, when you look around the government operational mode, there's quite a lot to be discontented about. And citizens are protesting these, either by the things they say, or by the videos they make, or by the writings they put up, or even the physical demonstration on the streets. Those things are happening. Now, when does this build up into a crescendo that actually threatens the government? We haven't gotten there yet. It doesn't mean that we will not get there, especially if government persists in not listening to citizens, in not taking into account the pain that citizens are going through. You know, we speak about the economic situation in the country, we speak about the poverty levels, we speak about how people's income, and that's for those that earn income. There's a whole lot of people who are not able to earn income because of the nature of our economy and how they've been marginalized by it. But even those who earn an income are finding that their income is not able to pay for their living. And so all of that is building up. I don't know when it explodes in a way that the government is not able to manage it. And when you see people demonstrate on the streets, you're going to get to a stage where people are going to say, it doesn't matter. Shoot, if you will, because we can't go on this way. And it happened during the Arab Springs when people just got to a point where the gentleman in Algeria set himself ablaze. That started the Arab Spring. I do not know when we get to that point, but if you ask me how far away we are from it, I think we are at the precipice of it.
So the other side now is, let me use me for instance. I've been advocating for good governance for the people, and then I get into office and I turn 360. Well, no, not 360, 180. So the question then would be that, do the people that have been working with me, are the people that gave me this room to serve them, have they also turned 180? Is it that they don't know what to do to get me to get back to them and serve them as I ought?
No, they do. Like I said, that's why it's a top-down approach. And I know the argument about, bottom-up approach. I know all of that in the sense that, yes, that should be the ideal. But in a system that has gotten so often as we are in today, I don't like to use the word, but you perhaps need a savior. Someone who decides, this is it. I will serve the people. And you will find it one day. This country will find it one day. Someone who decides it's not about me, it's not about my family, it's not about my children, it's about the people. Of course, he will make enemies. Because what you find is you have a president who has decided that it's his time to indulge. So he puts his hand in to the public purse. Everyone around him does the same. And in order to keep himself in power, he encourages people around him to steal. So for all of those people, if the president is stealing, then they should join the party. But the day you find a president that says, I will not steal, everybody else will reset. Everybody else. Because there's a consequence. First of all, you will not appoint people who are coming to steal into your different ministries. Ministers will be appointed because you have interviewed them. There's a system in this country where you ask governors to nominate ministers for you. I find it exceedingly outrageous. And it's the first sign of corruption. Why would a governor who has a state to run nominate ministers to represent the state for you? And you put people as ministers who basically are not coming to serve. They've been put in there, nominated by other party officials or whatever. But if you put in people whom you have carefully selected, whom you have asked questions about, whom you have investigated, and who share your vision, or if they don't share your vision, you bring them and tell them what your vision is, then you would get things right. We're talking today about the entire, most of northern Nigeria having no electricity. As you and I speak now, there's no electricity in this building, public electricity. So if you have appointed someone to be in charge of electricity, and this is 2 years of this administration, and there's no electricity. In fact, the situation is worse today than it was when you took over. If you appointed someone, and the fault is not from you who appointed the person, and there's no electricity, what should you do?
So that might also point to the fact that the person doing their appointing may not be exactly clear of what the vision is. As I said, where there's no vision, the people perish. Or maybe the vision is incomplete and needs help to be completed. But the politicking around makes it difficult for that vision to be crystallized.
No, sir, there is no incomplete vision. Is there a vision or there's no vision?
Okay.
Now, if there's a vision, you know where you're headed. And you plan your map. You plan your pathway in that direction. And you get there. The vision may be misplaced. That's different. But, of course, you head in that direction. If there's no vision, then it's all for all. And none for us all. And that's really perhaps where we are right now. That I have no idea what the vision is, and I have no idea who is in charge. Because there must be people who are accountable to someone. But where there is no one that seems to take control, then everybody is doing what they do. And we had a situation when you had the very incompetent General Buhari as president, who perhaps some ministers never saw him throughout the period that they were ministers. They never sat down with him. They never discussed what they were bringing to the table. And so the country completely, groped for more than 8 years, for about 8 years.
So, what we've been doing so far, we've been talking about the people in authority, the leaders. And again, I'd like to clarify that we're talking about all of this, not just from the top, from the president, even down to the local government, because we have the Supreme Court telling us that this local governments are autonomous. So they have to run their systems and they have to get their monies and all of that. And they are supposed to be closer to the people. For instance, there's someone I grew up with who came out to contest for my local government in Cross River State. Whether he got it, I'm not too sure. The elections haven't even happened yet. So, but imagine that man who calls me my brother gets into office. I may not be able to reach him again. Is it a question of the laws are not there to hold these people accountable? Or is it a question of the citizens needing to hold them accountable? Because we have laws. And indeed, someone had this conversation with me and he said, if we can just follow the laws, our constitution as it is.
Well, yeah, the laws are there. And in every society where a law is not enforced, there's always going to be a problem. And I'm not talking of just Nigeria. You saw what happened in the United States during the previous election where Donald Trump lost. And you could see that in spite of the law, that there was an attempt to stop the realization of that elections. So in every society, and that's why when you listen to the conversations going on in the US politics, you have people who have their fears about where the country is headed. So every country has its fears, and Nigeria has its own fears. Where you appoint people and where the president, and this country has the most powerful president in the world, I'm sorry to say, because nowhere in the world does the president act, okay, maybe that's not correct, but across the world, Nigeria ranks amongst the countries with the most powerful president, because this president basically, and I'm not talking of this whoever is in the office today, but the nature of the exercise of power in this country is almost arbitrary. And because it's almost arbitrary, it means that even where institutions exist, those institutions can be subverted by the powerful person at the top, not allowing the institutions to function. Look at the example, going back again, a very positive example from the US. The president's son, Hunter Biden, was charged for a criminal offense, and he's in prison, serving a prison term as we speak. Would that happen in Nigeria?
It's possible.
I don't know. There's no example to even show that anybody has been charged in authority with any offense. So it's a question of allowing the institutions to function. And as soon as we understand that, as soon as the judiciary becomes independent, and you do not have government officials manipulate the judiciary and dictate to the judiciary, and people who subvert institutions, as soon as they begin to be held to account for subverting those institutions, then will you begin to see things go in the right direction. When you do have people become accountable and there's a consequence for lack of accountability, and that consequence comes from perhaps an electoral process where an electoral commission is set up, and that electoral commission is left to be independent and not manipulated by politicians. As soon as people see they can lose elections, then these institutions will begin to function. We saw a sitting president in this country, for the first time in our history, lose an election. And whatever it is you say of President Jonathan, that's his biggest legacy for Nigeria. A lot of us had criticisms of the way he managed government, but all of that gets wiped away when you see that major contribution he made to Nigeria's democratic development.
Yeah. We were talking about what the government or what those in leadership at the different levels have been doing. And some of them are, not some, all of them came from the society. And of course, like when they go in there, they do a 180-degree turn. Is it possible that the citizens, you and I, are responsible for that 180 turn?
Well, certainly. I think that when you look at elections and you encourage people to vote for who they think can make a difference rather than who comes from their church or mosque or religion or tribe, when you encourage people to be much more metropolitan in the way that they vote, hopefully this country gets to that point where you can see citizens make a decision, informed decision about who they support and who they would vote for. But more importantly, I think it's really that, like I said, you have to have that leader who emerges and who is able and willing to transform the country. If the man at the top, basically, and who has the authority, does not deliver on expectations from him and doesn't recognize the important need to be deliberate in doing things right, then you would keep up with this problem and challenge that those coming from behind him, those whom he has put into position to support him to deliver on the promises that he has made, will take a cue And so the bad governance process continues. So it's really who is the leader? What change is he prepared to make? What is he prepared to sacrifice in order to, and what vision does he have in order to get the country in that direction? If, like we mentioned, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, who had a vision of working to deliver his country into a visionary, developed country, given a time frame. If we have such a leader in this country, then you would get there.
But sorry, you've mentioned Lee Kuan Yew like 3 or 4 times, but you do know that right now there's a situation where one of his sons is saying the country itself is very corrupt.
Yes, you will always have a situation where you have a regression. And if he's saying it, is because he has looked at what his father did. And he's worried that his father's visions, the ball may have been dropped. So you will always have that situation. And, you know, what has happened with Singapore, it's a first world country. Some countries are living 20 years ahead of this time. There are countries who have so developed, technology is so developed, artificial intelligence is taking over. There are countries in that mold who are upset that they are not moving as fast as they would like to see themselves move. And yet, these are countries that are way, way, way far advanced. Some of them 50 years or more advanced than countries like Nigeria. And I say to people, you can buy technology. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we can become a first world country, Nigeria, if we have a leadership that is prepared to take us there.
Let's leave the leadership and come back again to the citizens. So, when government puts out policy, I mean, from the moment this administration came in, they've come up with different policies. And everybody has cried, hurrah, what's going on? We're dying. But the citizens' participation in the implementation or even coming up with the different policies seem to be neither here nor there. Looks as everyone's just looking for, can I just get my own share of this whole thing? So what do you think are the issues here that Nigerian citizens are not participating in policy implementation or even development?
No, when citizens are shut out, the only way that they can get in is by removing those who are shutting them out.
But have Nigerian citizens been shut out of policy environment?
I think that it's a situation where the policy frameworks and the policy institutions are reacting in different ways. You do have the National Assembly that I would say is open because we participate in some of the conversations around policy by making alternative suggestions. At the executive level, they implement the law. But what I keep saying to people is also that, and people say, oh, a member of National Assembly has not performed well because he hasn't sponsored X number of bills. And I say to people, the National Assembly, and this is ironical, has no business proposing bills. I mean, of course, there are exceptional cases where members could propose bills, but that's not the ideal. The ideal is that bills should be proposed by the executive because they are the ones running the government. They are the ones who know where a particular law is shortcoming. You recently had, for instance, the president with the attorney general creating a legal a committee to reform laws and bring them up to date. That's what they should do. The president, has he proposed any constitutional alteration? He has not. Electoral Act, has he proposed any changes? He has not. And there are several laws. There's, of course, the tax reform law, that bill that has now been sent to the National Assembly. Which
has been rejected by the Northern Governors Forum.
Well, we would have to find out. It has to go through its process. It's been submitted. The Northern Governors Forum, or whichever other forum exists, can go to the National Assembly and make proposals on how this can be changed. This is all part of the lawmaking process, that there would be people who will object to a law. Us from civil society, it's a law that we are scrutinizing right now, and we will state our views on it.
But in all of these things, what stops the citizens from putting forth their own constitution amendment bills, as in citizen-driven? With all the civil society groups we have, are we having some proposals coming from the Nigerian citizens to the National Assembly, which you have described as being open? Would they even listen and look at those bills submitted by the Nigerian citizen? Or even as a citizen, as an individual, can I draft a proposal to a proposed amendment to the Constitution, take it to the National Assembly, go through all the process, and they will take my bill and consider it?
Yes, members of National Assembly. That's why I said, all of the lead in amending the Constitution should come from the executive. But what you have seen is members of National Assembly themselves proposing bills. And those bills are not proposed in vacuum. They are proposed with inputs they receive from citizens, from their constituents, from citizens' organizations. So I think that there's a lot of input that citizens make into the lawmaking process. Now, the question is how much of that gets passed into law, how much of existing laws gets repealed. Civil society groups, for instance, have been talking very seriously about restrictive laws against civil society operations and have been pushing that. How much of that has been repealed? How much more new laws are coming on? How much are you using taxation to further impoverish the people? Because one of the key problems today is that when you set up a business, and that's why several businesses are shutting down, it makes more sense if you have a lot of money to simply go and buy treasury bills and get the interest and not bother about constructing an office,
employing
people, struggling with NEPA about light or no lights, struggling about diesel, buying a generator, and now dealing with a much more devastating aspect, which is multiple incredible taxation. You have local governments with all sorts of taxations. Local governments have hired what they call consultants, even in Abuja here. And it's shocking that in where we should have a showcasing of our qualities as a country, you have consultants who are basically inventing taxes that they are proposing to the local governments and to the authorities in Abuja to tax people. So somebody is walking past, they see you put out a mast to receive internet, and they give you a charge and say that you should pay taxation. Meanwhile, you have paid taxation through the service providers.
You pay value-added tax.
You pay VAT.
You pay your income tax, personal income tax. You own a business, is your withholding tax, all of that.
So by the time you set up a business, and I'm looking at Abuja particularly, you have close to 20 different taxes. And I'm not exaggerating this. So it makes no sense to set up a business, because all you need to do if you have the cash is just put it into some revenue yielding undertaking and just live off it. So that's why businesses are collapsing, people are losing their jobs, people are not being employed into new jobs simply because the taxation system, which puts a lot of money into the hands of government, most of which is misused, is killing business.
So the question then will be, can the citizens still hold the government accountable? How can they do that?
Citizens are making demands on government. And that's why I keep saying that, are we at the point like you had the Arab Springs? I think we're at the precipice. I think we're at that point where it would tip. Because citizens have protested, citizens groups have said to government, you need to reform this, you need to change this. It's not about taxing people to death, it's about making conditions of living better for people. And government is not acting or not acting as fast as it should. And for a lot of citizens, it is frustrating. If you look at the so-called increase in minimum wage from 30,000 to 70,000, I tell you that it's perhaps even worse than it was when people were earning 30,000. Because if you look around the offices, people who used to spend 1,500 naira to enter public transport to go to work every day are now spending between 4,000 and 4,500 a day to get to work. That those that enter public transport. Those that have to buy petrol spend much more. Some park their cars. So when citizens get to that point of frustration and anger, as we used to say in our student union days, how many people soldier go kill? It will get to the point where it does not matter how much policemen you put to stop a protest, where the society will crumble and where government would have to understand that citizens have had it up to there.
But earlier you mentioned technology, the different platforms that they are. Can they be used to push forward the citizens' conversation? Would the government or those in leadership even listen to these conversations? I'm hopeful that we will not get to a precipice. I mean, where we will not get to that point where we tip, where there's no tipping point. I'm hopeful. But what's on ground to ensure that we don't get to that tipping point? How can we ameliorate that? Turn things around?
I think we have to liberalize government. And this government, or I'm not just talking of whoever is in office today, but I'm saying that government in Nigeria is not liberal. You've got to liberalize government so that people in their own private creativity can utilize technology to advance. When you put a lot of restrictions and charges and taxes and obstacles to individual creativity in a society, then you have a lot of problem. You have Nigerian citizens who are very creative, who are very innovative, who have excellent knowledge of technology. One of the biggest industries in India today is innovation and technology. And that's why you see a lot of innovations and technology taking precedence in India. It's becoming a huge technology hub for the world. Is the government aware that citizens, young people, have incredible creativity with technology? And that what they need to do is provide greater access to technology, to internet, to innovation? They are not. What basically you have is a bunch of people who control different agencies of government who are constantly looking for how to cut down creativity and innovation by citizens, who seem to think that everything that is innovative must be cut down. So government itself has become an obstacle to development in this country. The president set up a committee, I don't remember the name of the head of that committee, on taxation, for instance. And that committee identified tens and tens of taxes and obstacles to the ease of doing business in Nigeria. Nigeria has one of the longest lists in the world of obstruction to the ease of doing business in a country. If a president decides that I want to genuinely ease business operations in the country, they can do it. Because what you see is that this business of obstructing citizens is not in order to acquire or get more revenue to develop the country. I have no explanation, for instance, why government agencies who collect revenue on behalf of the government, the customs, for instance, should be asked to keep a certain percentage of their revenue collection for their own use. Every revenue collected must be put into the funds, the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation, and every agency budgets before they can use the money. But in this country, because some agencies are allowed to keep a certain percentage, they keep taxing businesses and individuals in order to increase the gross income they get or revenue they get, take off their percentage that they are statutorily allowed to get, and remit the rest to government if they do remit all of it. But the consequence of that is that they are constantly taxing the overtaxed. And businesses are crumbling, citizens are getting desperate.
So, at the end of the day, what do we do? I had to whisper that, right? What do we do? I mean, how do we come out of these quagmire? It's like, forgive this phrase, dog-eat-dog situation. How do we get out of this space?
You see, I've said to you that leadership is key. Where we fail to get leadership, we must then examine how do we use our electoral system to elect a sort of enlightened leadership for the country. Unfortunately, our electoral system today is very, very bad and is disintegrating.
So one would think that, one would think that would change with the Supreme Court ruling that local government, again, they are closer to the people. Local government should stay independent and they should run their administration. One would think that would change. But it looks as if it's same old, same old.
The Supreme Court has made its pronouncements. Now, it said that every local government must be democratically elected. That's already in the Constitution anyway. Now, what have these practitioners of the Constitution done? Or even in trying to respect the Supreme Court judgment, what have they done? They've conducted all manners of sham local government elections. Some states have even invented some mechanism of continuing to control local government funds by getting the State House of Assembly to pass laws that again practically appropriates the funds of the local governments. So it goes to the point that I make about leadership. And that leadership can either emerge by some person who says, I will not do things wrong, I will not be corrupt. Or all of us as citizens working to ensure that our failed electoral system is revamped. And now you must go back to President Yar'Adua, who, when he was elected, because the electoral body we have today is the same as we had in 2007 that conducted a very disgraceful election. You must go back to President Yar'Adua, who said, this electoral system has failed. Let's recreate it. And he set up the Committee on Electoral Reform, and that committee made proposals. And then what you saw was elections that followed in 2011 and to a good extent 2015 were generally acceptable. The 2023 elections was badly conducted. It was an election that disappointed a whole lot of Nigerians and did not meet the threshold of credibility. And I have been saying this for a very long time, that this administration needs to come out to Nigerians and take action to say we must reform our electoral system. You must acknowledge that what happened, even in 2019, but especially in 2023, what happened there was not a credible election in 2023. And say that even though there are beneficiaries from that election, those beneficiaries who now hold power are prepared to change and give the country a credible electoral system. Because if we go to 2027 with the failures of 2023, my fear is that the elections in 2027 will be far worse. And if anything is far worse than the 2023 general elections, then I worry for the country.
As a wind down, what would be your word to both the citizens and the government as it concerns policy and participation in policy implementation?
I think citizens need to take an interest in everything that government is doing. I think government needs to open up to understand that when people ask it or make demands of it, they are not doing it from the basis of their own selfish purposes. And even when they do, that government has a responsibility to listen and to ensure that whatever it decides to do is done in the best interest of citizens. That's my word to citizens. They must hold government accountable. They must make demands. They must prepare to challenge the failures of our electoral system. Because again, while we make this electoral system as having failed, it is only the citizens who can turn it around. And citizens should prepare that they would want to turn it around.
But when they do that attempts to turn it around and all of that, and they get blocked, or they are not seeing results, who give up?
That's where the desperation comes in, and no one can hold back anybody. No one can hold back a desperate people. No one can hold back a hungry people. No one can hold back an angry people. And Nigeria is in that direction.
Mr. Nwankwo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that is our show for today. We want to thank you for letting us be a part of your day. But know this, send us your feedback. What do you think? Is it your fault that the government's not listening for your ideas? Or is it the government's fault that you're not participating in policy making? Share your thoughts. Our handles are right there on your screen. Also, go back and watch this program again. Just go to youtube.com/channelsweb or go to channelstv.com/podcast to get started. Till we bring you another edition of the program, it's bye-bye from us.